Hey everybody, so we're here at PixelBlips. We're doing a special episode. This special episode will be ranking. Da 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 da. Wait, maybe I should go. Da 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 da. Anyway, the Final Fantasy games.
Yes.
So,
so we're not going to talk about all the Final Fantasy games. Like
Nope.
we're going to leave out Tactics and that whole side set. We're going to leave out like Final Fantasy Adventure.
Yep.
And
Mystic Quest.
and the MMOs. We're not going to talk about
we're not
11
going to
or
talk about
14.
We're not going to talk about the tangential stuff, Secret
Yeah.
of Mana. We're not going to talk about Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross.
Well, those aren't really Final Fantasy games. They're just developed by the same thing. But they're very Final Fantasy-esque.
Often marketed in Final Fantasy stuff.
Yeah,
So,
and we're also not going to talk about like the direct sequels like 10-2 or 13-2 or Lightning Returns.
Or Revenant Wings 12, or Advent Children, or Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. That should be on there.
No.
Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core made me like Final Fantasy VII
just a little
much
bit
more.
Yeah, that was pretty good game. Anyway.
So what we are going to do, so there are 14 titles. Now, if you shave off the two MMOs, you are left with 12 titles.
Yes.
So how we're going to break this up, because we could be sitting here arguing all day if
it was between
is actually better than 5 or 9, blah, 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 blah. What we're going to do is break it up into the top 3 best ones.
And then the 6 in the middle.
6 in the middle, and then the top 3 ones that you should just stay away from.
Probably stay away from.
Those, if you want to be a completist, by all means, go play them, but you're just not going to get the time. You're not going to get a good investment for your time, which brings us back to last week's episode. Oh, shit, I broke something.
You didn't break anything, it's fine.
Okay.
Let me see.
So
yeah, we're still good.
We're going to do this we're going to start with, we're going to do this in chronological order.
Yeah.
So, middle, bad. So, Final Fantasy 1.
Yes. I never actually played the original version of Final Fantasy 1. I could never find a copy of it for the NES.
Okay, so this seems like be a good time to bring you our credentials in this, because without them, we're just two old farts effing around. I played Final Fantasy 1 back in 1991. I am an old school Final Fantasy fan. I have played every single iteration. It took me a while to get to 7 and 8, but we're there for the start of 9. I've been there picking the game up day one since. I picked up...
As much as you lament it.
As much as I lament it. I went back and played Anthology. I played, in college. I was voracious. Anyone I could get. If it wasn't translated yet, I got a fan translation, So, starting with that, Dave, what's your credential?
The first Final Fantasy I played was actually 7, which may tell you a lot about why I like certain Final Fantasies more than Andy does. But I did play, I played Final Fantasy 7, I played Final Fantasy 8, because I was like, 7 was great, let's play 8. And then 8 was not so good. I've not touched a lot of, I've never played 2, I've never played 3, so obviously those are going to go,
you have to trust me on those.
There's 2 and then there's 3.
Yeah, well, we'll discuss that when we get to them.
I've played a good chunk of 6. I've played a lot of 10, which I like more than a lot of people do.
We'll say this. Except for the MMO ones, I have currently beaten every Final Fantasy numbered title that is out there.
Yeah.
So,
and I played 11, the MMO. I did not like it. It was like one of the first MMOs I played, and I was like, wow, every time you die, you de-level. That sucks.
The trick is to not die.
Yeah, the trick is to not die. But I've played a decent amount of Final Fantasy games. I've not played all of them, but I've played enough of them, and I've played enough of each of the ones that I have played to think I can make at least a somewhat educated
educated guess. Okay, so here we go. So number 1, Final Fantasy 1. The original. This one's going in the bad list, and here's why. For me, you're
gonna put it down there in the bottom 3. Huh?
In the bottom 3, just because. What I look at when I look at a Final Fantasy game is I want interesting battle system, because that's what you're going to be doing.
I mean, you have to think
most of the time.
Yes, you will be doing a lot of that, but you have to look at when that game was released.
I'm saying if you're playing them now.
If you're playing them now, yes. If you were going to go out and buy all 12 of them and play all of them over the course of like a month.
Oh, way more than a month.
Well, you could power through
all of them in a month, and you would be poorer for it, because a lot of these games you need to sink into.
You can't just rush through. But
1 is a game you can rush through.
Yeah.
Because there's no story Nothing.
Yes.
Like I said,
well, there is
a
story, but
we're going to look
not
at
that great.
the battle system, because that's where most of your gameplay is going to take place. We're going to look at the gameplay around everything that's not in the battle system. So that's running around in the world and the mini games and all that other lovely stuff that people talk about. We're going to talk about the story, and we're going to talk about the characters, and we're going to talk about the length of the game. So a lot like Dragon Quest I, which was Final Fantasy I's main competition when it came out on the Famicom in Japan and on the Nintendo Entertainment System here in the States. There's no story to speak of. There's no real characters to speak of. There's nothing.
Like, I mean,
There's this much more story in Final Fantasy I than there is in Dragon Quest I. And that is like saying eating one saltine is better than eating no saltines.
There's like a whisper of a story, right? Like you are the heroes of light, and you have to
go find the orbs to unlock the temples. You have to go to find the temples to get the orbs to then write the time flux to fight Garland and to save the princess.
Yes, and that is the entirety of that story in about 5 seconds.
The big thing, the big reason that this thing had a story over Dragon Quest I, and while Final Fantasy became known for having really good stories, where Dragon Quest became known for having really good gameplay and art, was that in this game, you could level up your characters to different classes.
Yes.
They actually grew up.
You chose the classes at the beginning, and then they would go from it was like what, Red Mage to Red Wizard, and Fighter to Warrior or whatever, and that was kind of cool. But you have to get pretty far into the game, or like halfway through the game before that actually starts happening, right?
Yes. Well, you actually have to go get an item and take it to Bahamut. So however you pronounce that, that'll come up a lot more. You get this item, take it to Bahamut, and Bahamut casts a magic spell, and you all grow up.
Yeah. But it is also the beginning of like what we consider to be the traditional Final Fantasy class system.
Yep.
So you have your fighter, your thief, your monk, your white, black, and red mages, and stuff like that. And that is like the core of a lot of Final Fantasy games.
So a lot like the Spider-Man comics of the early 70s and late 60s, the only reason to go back to it is because you really want to see everything, and you want to see where this stuff started.
And you can get it, you don't necessarily have to go out and spend however much.
We'll agree to that in this next part, because there's a reason you can't buy number 1 by itself.
Yes. Well, you can, because I did.
NES cartridge.
Oh. The NES cartridge. No,
that's the only way.
No.
Maybe on the App Store.
You can buy Final Fantasy 1 for the PSP by itself. You don't have to buy 1 and 2.
Oh, well, yeah, the remixes.
Yeah, the remakes. The remakes aren't that much different, though.
Yeah, the remakes and the remixes of 1 and 2, if you're going that direction, get them on the PlayStation Portable. It's the best version of both. The added dungeons actually make it worth a while, and the graphics aren't eye-cutting.
Yeah, they're not like hard pixel edges and stuff like that, but that's okay.
So, on to number 2, which is also going to end up in the lower 3 because the story's there finally, but the gameplay isn't.
Yeah, everything I've never played 2, and I'm probably better off for it.
So 2 finally starts, they were like, we need to make it a story. It starts the tenets of Final Fantasy, that you are a rogue group fighting against an empire. Except for maybe Final Fantasy IV, I would say Final Fantasy II is the most like Star Wars in the story.
The most like Star Wars, that's great.
And it's cool. You normally get it bundled with 1 if you're buying Origins Collection or Dawn of Souls for the GBA. I would suggest Dawn of Souls if that were your thing. Basically because it's not going to take you very long. The characters are sort of interesting, but sort of not.
It's a real wish-washy meh game.
Yeah, and the leveling system is just horrible and really broken, that's why we're going to get the only other game that's going to end up in the lower third is what I would consider horribly, really broken. And the map's not that interesting. Once again, the only reason to go back to it is to really
if you want to be a completionist and
to
play
figure
all
out where
the
all
Final
this
Fantasy
stuff
games.
started.
Yeah.
So 3. Full disclosure, I haven't played 3 in any of the official translations. I've only played 3 in the
I was going to say, 3 isn't
translations.
really available in the U.S.
Yeah,
it wasn't for a very long time. And now,
So
now there are
you
a
get
couple of them.
The DS version, the PSP version, which we're also playing in PS Vita. And 3 is cool because it introduced a long-standing tradition that has held through to current day the Final Fantasy job system, which is a way of speccing your characters how you want them to be specced. They gain different skills based on what job they have. It really revolutionized Final Fantasy when it came out. It never came out here. It would be really amazing if it did.
Yeah.
But the only problem was, once again, your story is meh, your characters are meh. Meh.
Yeah, I mean, the
job system carries it above
1 and 2.
1 and 2, and out of the doldrums of these are the worst Final Fantasies.
Yeah.
You'll actually play this if you get the newer versions on the DS or the Vita. You'll actually enjoy it. Yeah. It's very fun for kind of a retro feely thing. And specking out that job system, the job system still is really fun. It really works well, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
in its earliest form, you're like, this is awesome.
Yeah, the job system is a lot of fun. And by job system, you mean you can level a character and then switch them at some point during the story, right? You don't just choose a thing like because 1 had a job system.
No, I mean you can.
You level the character independently of their job.
Yeah, when I say the job system, I mean the job system as Square Enix talks about it, where you can switch out the role of a certain character without switching out that character.
Yeah. Okay. Because with 1,
so sometimes your main guy
stuck with your party.
Sometimes your main guy's a knight. Sometimes your main guy's a wizard. Sometimes your main guy's a dancer.
Okay.
Are they still called dancers if they're guys?
Yes, I think.
Okay, so 4.
Okay, so 4.
Or as it was originally known here in the States, Final Fantasy 2.
Yeah, because
4 is the one that has for me, that's the first one with a really good story, solid story. The gameplay is a little. The battle system is good because it has the active time battle system, but the only difference is your characters aren't really that interesting. I mean, your characters are interesting. The story's really good. If I were to say anything, I would say this would be in the top end of the middle.
So it's like, it would be like the 5 or 6 slot, not the 7 or 8 slot.
It would be the top end of the middle. The story's really good. The battle system's fun. The world is interesting. But at the same time, it's all kind of constrained by that classic Final Fantasy battle system and tropes and stuff of learning. And the other thing is, as much as people complain about Final Fantasy 13 holding your hand and not allowing you a lot of options, Final Fantasy 4 holds your hand until the end battle. And literally, like, dictates,
this is how you're supposed to play throughout the entirety
of the game. This is who is in your party at this moment. This is who is in your party in this moment. It's really good, but for me, it's why when people complain about Final Fantasy holding your hand, I'm like, Final Fantasy's been holding your hand for a long-ass time.
Yeah, they do. And you know, each game has... It's gotten worse as the generations have gone on, right? Like, there's more of a tutorial a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, because the games are more complex.
Yeah, the games are way more complex. Like, 1 is just like, here you go, have fun. And 2 is pretty much, I would assume, the same way.
1 and 2 give you very little direction.
It's just like, walk around until something interesting happens.
So does 3. But 4, it's really hard to grind in that game. Because I went back and saw about a documentary about the making of Final Fantasy 4. They actually kind of figured out the mathematics of, if I want your character to be, the characters to be this level when they meet this boss, so it is this challenging, I need to put so many pixels in between them and the boss based on the monster drop ratio. So Final Fantasy 4 for me, if you want to grind, you really should just find a spot and walk in a circle. Because that's the only way out of that mathematical progression.
Yeah. I mean, and it was before games like, we'll say Lunar, had like this weird, okay, the boss has a multiple of your main character's stats, which is probably the way to go for a lot of things, just to make sure that the challenge is there. But that's a different series. And then there's 5.
5 is my personal favorite. I will go back to 5 on rainy days. I will go back to 5 on windy days. I will go back to 5 on the beach. I will go back to 5 anytime. Because I love that battle system. I love the job system and the progression system. And the story's there, and it's serviceable, and it has characters that you actually care about.
Yeah.
That were fun. It's not like, I think after Final Fantasy IV, everyone was so like, the world was so dour and upsetting, and they were like, we need to pull back a little bit from this.
Make it less depressing.
And you'll see that one more time during the series. But I would once again put 5 with 4 and 3 in the middle of the pack. If you're going back to play them now, you're going to have a lot of fun. They're just not really what Final Fantasy is anymore.
No, they're what Final Fantasy used to be.
Yeah.
And they are, you know, from what I gather, they are probably some of the best Super Nintendo games that came out.
Oh yeah.
Because 5 and 6 came out on the Super Nintendo, correct?
Yes.
1, 2, and 3 were all NES games?
Yes.
Okay.
So if I were to say, if you came to me and you're like, Andy, I want to go back and play an old school Final Fantasy, I'll be like, do you like story? And you would say yes or no. If you said no, I would say play Final Fantasy V, you'll love it, it's amazing. If you said yes, I'd say
play 6.
Play 6, which is going to be our next one, which is the first entrant into the
good.
You should play this.
Yes.
This is the best. Like for me, Final Fantasy V, like we said, is a personal favorite. I really love the battle system because there's just so much customization to it. They kind of take the best parts of 4, the best parts of 5, you cram them together and you get 6. 6 has a story that is amazing. Yes. It has characters that are amazing. It has a battle system that is amazing.
It has a bad guy that makes you want to punch your screen. Kefka is such an asshole.
It has the best bad guy. Kefka Palazzo is the best villain in a Final Fantasy game. I will stand by that until the day I die.
Kefka is Joker crazy. That's how bad Kefka is.
Kefka's better than the Joker. Because like the Joker has no reason to be nuts, right? And that's the really cool thing about the Joker is he's just crazy.
Yeah.
Kefka is the Joker given funneled form and aim. Kefka doesn't want to be alive and views the entire thing as this horrible affront to his sensibilities. Kefka for me is if Thanos from the Marvel Universe and the Joker were the same character. Just so evil, so corrupt, and crazy that you're just like, moment to moment, you just want to see what he's going to do next. He destroys the world and then builds a monument out of trash because he was bored.
Yes. Kefka is absolutely bonkers.
The only thing better than Kefka are the heroes. Terra's search for identity and Celis's search for her friends and meaning in life after the end of the world. When I first played 6, after the world of balance goes away and the world of ruin starts, seeing Celis throw herself off a cliff was just like a monumental, like, ba-bam!
Did that character just kill themselves?
It was that reason that when Aerith dies in 7, I didn't really care that much. Because it wasn't as cool as when Celis threw herself off a cliff.
Spoilers, by the way.
Yeah, for both.
in case you didn't know.
For both. And then Celis's quest after that moment of depression and her like, I'm going to find everybody, I'm going to write this because it is me and Kefka, brother and sister, like I need to fix this.
Yes.
And then how the world of ruin is played out, how the world of balance is played out. The world of balance is so lively and rich for a Super Nintendo game that when it becomes the world of ruin, you are really upset. And like, there are moments when you go town to town randomly talking to people that like are actually emotionally moving. Like I remember one town you go to an old lady and she's like, the world is so destroyed now. It was so much better when I was a little girl. And the screen fades out and comes up to the world of balance with her running around in a circle laughing as a little girl.
Kid,
And I was just like, that is severely depressing for a Super Nintendo game.
Thanks,
Final
Fantasy. So 6 is probably one of the best Final Fantasies of all time. We're not going to rank these like definitely number 1 and definitely number 3. Because we don't need to do that.
I think if we were to rank anything like with surety, it would probably be that 6 is probably the best Final Fantasy.
Yeah, that's about it.
And that's about as close as you can get to like, it's probably the best.
Yeah.
So 6 is up there.
So 6 is in the top 3.
So here's our one of our big discussions. 7.
7 was the first one I played end to end.
Yep.
I really, really, really enjoyed the magic system in that game. I understand
it's broken.
It has its broken parts, and the story is kind of whatever, right? Like you are a former soldier guy, and then all of a sudden you're like, you join this group of people who's going to try to save the world, and you wind up, the world blows up anyway. Because one crazy guy with a huge sword decides, I don't like this plan.
Who's not as crazy as Kefka, but.
No.
When I thought about it later, after I played Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, and if we were to count Crisis Core into this, I would count 7 higher than I do, but since we're not, I don't. The similarities between Kefka's backstory and Sephiroth's backstory are amazing, except that Sephiroth is some sort of hot topic goth guy, and Kefka is a crazy fucking clown.
He's a goofy-looking jester.
But it makes the story more resonant in Kefka's case.
Because we don't know why.
Yeah, well, actually, they do
find out
explain
why he's a jester?
He's a jester, but at the same token, like, it makes him even more upsetting.
Yeah. But jesters and clowns are kind of scary anyway.
Remember when we said only 3 would make the best list, only 3 would make the worst list? Because only 3 are making the best list, for me, 7 falls in the middle of the pack.
And, you know, when you look at the entirety of the series, 7 does fall in the middle of the pack. The one thing 7 really has going for it is it made that genre popular.
Yeah,
it was one of the best
the
selling JRPGs ever.
Yeah. The sad part is that the next one we're going to talk about was the best selling JRPG ever.
And it made me sad.
8 is horribly broken. Horribly.
It's not great.
Horribly broken.
It's not great.
The battle system is broken.
I mean, there was some
card battle system is every time it would come up, I would get angry.
Yeah, the side like. What was the first one that actually had the little side questy games, like the mini game stuff that you could do? I want to say there was one in 7, but I don't remember.
There was one in 7 because you could go to the Golden Casino.
Yeah, and then there was all kinds
6.
There was all kinds of mini games.
I think you could chocobo breed in 5.
But either way,
yeah.
Like the part of with 7 was, or taking a step back here, but like in order to get some of the best stuff, you had to participate in some of these mini games. You had to breed the golden chocobo to go get the best summon.
Yeah, the mini games in 7 really elevated quite a bit.
Yeah, and there were a lot of them. Like you had the bike section that you play early in the game. You could play again over and over and over again.
Yeah. Which it wasn't anything new for JRPGs. Other JRPGs had done this before.
Yes.
I think mainly of the Breath of Fire series, but at the same time, none of them had really done them as interesting or as amazing as 7 did.
Yeah, so that's why 7 earns its spot in the middle, and it elevated the JRPG and the Final Fantasy franchise. It made it what it is.
And some of the characters are really cool. Tifa's really cool.
Yeah.
Aerith, for her part, is really cool. I think they're both hamstringed by a plot device that is horribly forced on you.
Yeah, the whole do you choose between the two and you never really get either.
Yeah,
with Cloud.
But on the same token, there's Yuffie. So
yeah, and then you get Vincent, which I always used Vincent versus Yuffie anyway. I just got her as a completionist. It's like, I'll get this character and then never use it. And then you go to 8 and you're like, well,
8 was kind of like they were sitting on the high on the hog, really successful, and clearly didn't know what to do with it. The story lacks direction. It's super weird.
Yeah.
The romance works, which is the center point of the story, but pretty much everything around the romance doesn't work.
Yeah.
8 ends up in the bad category.
There was a kind of like the Gunblade thing was kind of a neat idea, and the way that you could, like, if you timed your trigger pull properly, you could do extra damage. But if you got really good at that, that made some fights just trivial.
Yeah.
Like you could just take out one,
and how you learned new abilities by pulling, and that got really broken.
Yeah,
it got to the point where you could severely break the game, and it was just like...
Yeah, it was not the greatest Final Fantasy, and obviously it's not even in the top 10.
Yeah.
Or the top 5.
So it ends up that now we have our 3
We have our 3
worst.
bottom ones. which means one of my favorite ones isn't going to be in the bottom. Yay!
One of your favorite ones isn't going to be in the top either, because I think I know which one you're talking about. Okay, so...
No, I know it's not going to be in the top, but it's not going to be in the
bottom. So the good news is now that we're out of 8...
We get to go to 9!
Which is actually going to end up in the top 3!
Yay!
Because the story is amazing, and the characters are amazing, and the card battle system it works this time.
Yeah, the side questy mini game was pretty cool,
and it harkens back to everything Final Fantasy was.
Wow, we just totally did that in.
Yes, that was bad.
Yeah, but I didn't particularly like when I first saw 9. I didn't particularly care for the art direction, right? Like all the characters had large heads, tiny bodies.
Because if you remember, and we'll get into this when we talk about 13, when Final Fantasy 7 came out, you and I knew each other. We would talk about it all the time. I said I didn't like it. I hated the art design. I thought the limit break system was bad, blah, 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 blah. All this thing, like the mini games were kind of useless.
The limit break system was in other ones too. True. It was kind
of sort of in 6. Well, not really in 6, but kind of sort of in 6.
Yeah.
That's where it started. But then I was telling Dave while he's playing 7, I was like, 6 is the best. Like, you should really go back and play the 6 one. He was like, no, 7's where it's at with its cutscenes and everything. I was like, it doesn't even look like good. It looks like Gumby.
Well, Well, I mean, you're talking about a PS1 game, and you know this. It was a PS1 game that came on 3 discs.
Yeah, it was an early PS1 game too.
So it had they really hadn't gotten like we talk about with the PS3 and stuff like that. They hadn't gotten the grips on the hardware to do what
when 9 had come out. So if they had the internet in the form they have the internet now, the vitriol that would have been flung at 7 would have known no end, and you would think it is the worst Final Fantasy ever.
Yeah.
But when 9 came around, people really hated it. Like they were like, "What is this? There is a romance, but it's not really the center point of the story." Which I could see if you're coming from 8, you hadn't really played 7 or any of the other ones. You really think the romances are the center part of the story, and they're really not.
They're like tertiary.
And it wasn't really like, for me, the center point of 9 is Vivi and his journey, but then all the other characters in 9 have these really satisfying character journeys that hadn't really happened since 6, and like.
Yeah.
And
a lot of the characters in other ones are kind of flat.
Yes,
you know?
and it's just like, we talk about Ni no Kuni and whimsy and everything, like 9 just reeks of whimsy.
Yeah.
There's no like horrible world-ending, depressive, evil villain. You're just like this isn't that bad. Like this is really good.
Yeah.
And there's this whole thing on the internet about how 9 is actually like the world that holds all other Final Fantasy worlds together, and how like the Dark Knight in 9 is actually Garland from 1 brought forward in time.
I mean, yeah, there's these big I don't want to conspiracy theories, but there's these theories as how all of these worlds are connected in some way, shape, or form, and a lot of it is, well, they're all in like the same multiverse, and you know, you've
and
got
9 is the only one
order and chaos are always fighting each other.
That like winked and nodded at all that stuff, with how much of it is like, Vivi looks like a black mage. I wonder why that is.
I don't know.
Poor Vivi. Yes, so if you were going to come to me right now and you said, Andy, I want to play a Final Fantasy game, and I don't really want it to look too old school, but I don't mind if it does, I would say play 9.
Play 9. It is definitely one of the better of the series.
So 10.
Which Andy despises, even though he's going to buy it when it comes out on the Vita just so he can try to get one of another.
Well, actually, I've been thinking about it more and more as we get closer and closer to it, is do I buy it and replay it and give it a whole nother shot? Like I gave 8 a whole nother shot.
And, well, that didn't work out well for 8.
Yeah, I know.
That didn't work out well for 8.
That didn't work out well for 8. But once again, the romance, I think what they started to try and do in the story in 8, they actually kind of do in 10, although the more you explain the story of Final Fantasy X, the less it makes any fucking sense.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of silly. You were essentially
no spoilers. It's if you were to describe it, you would sound crazy.
Yes, I would. But I mean, the combat system is all right. The upgrade system is confusing.
There are 2 characters in it that I find enjoyable,
and neither of them are main characters.
Neither of them are main characters.
You know, the upgrade system is the massive sphere grid monstrosity.
Yes. If you didn't like the upgrade system in 13, you have 10 to thank for that.
Yeah. Pretty much, and that's essentially what this is.
And I think a lot of this has been, as we get into later Final Fantasies, is Square trying to figure out what these vastly different audiences for a Final Fantasy game want.
Yeah.
Do they want a romance? Do they want a deep political intrigue story? Do they want a sphere grid? Do they want the job system? Do they want some amalgamation of both in this weird Crystarium thing? Like, what are they going to do? Because they have to honor all the Final Fantasies that came before it while also staking out new ground and making things interesting.
Yeah.
So it's getting to the point where I wouldn't want to be a developer on Final Fantasy 15.
No, well, and we don't even know a whole hell of a lot about 15 at this point. But
yeah, you know, like Tetsuo Nomura Wet Dream.
Yeah, you know, the reason I like 10 is, and I know this sounds lazy as hell, but there was voice acting, and the voice acting was terrible. Don't get me wrong. The voice acting in the English version was terrible.
Stop. Ha 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 ha.
Yes. Yes.
Like during that scene, I was in college going, am I doing this right now? Because I don't think.
Am I?
Holy crap. 10 was the last game I turned into GameStop. Boom.
The voice acting was terrible in
Maybe
like
10
95% of that.
Here's what I'm thinking. 10-2 I didn't really give a shot, so I'm thinking maybe 10-2 might make 10 worthwhile, the same way that Crisis Core made 7 worthwhile.
Make more sense.
The same way 13-2 is making 13, my view of 13 even better.
Yeah, the voice acting was terrible. I'll give you that. And the remakes that are coming out, they look better, but I really don't think they've changed anything else. I think maybe they made some streamlined.
They've now given you the international versions, which has more cutscenes, more stuff to do, a bigger sphere grid. That's it.
A bigger sphere grid. That's exactly what we needed.
Yep.
It was a bigger freaking sphere grid. I'm still going to buy it.
I've heard people talk about the sphere grid, like they actually like it, and I'm just like...
I would honestly love to go back to Materia, but that's just me.
I think this is why I have a higher opinion of 13 than you do.
Because of
the job system.
Well, there's not necessarily.
We're going to get to that.
Jobs.
We'll get to that.
Anyway,
we'll get to 13.
On to 12. So 10 is in the middle somewhere.
So 10 is in the middle.
12.
10 would be towards the lower end of the middle.
Probably.
But I would probably rank. If I were taking my personal feelings out of it, I would rank 10 higher than 4. I mean, 10 higher than 5. Yeah. Not as high as 4.
Yeah.
Definitely below 7.
Okay. So onward.
So 12. 12 is the last one that I feel deserves to be in the top.
Yeah, it was as you said, a technical swan song for the PS2.
Yep.
Because it came out, less than a few months before the PS3 did.
I think a month.
Yeah.
I mean, 12 was like, looking at 12 now, no other game have I ever wanted an HD remaster of more than 12.
Yeah, and that's probably why you're going to buy 10.
Yes.
On the Vita or the PS3.
When we talk about, since the good top 3 have been filled out at this point, we talk about 6, how everything works together and it's just top notch. We talk about 9, how everything works together and it's just top notch. We talk about 12, how everything works together and it's just fucking top notch.
Yes.
The license board system, while confusing at the outset, ends up being better than the sphere grid, even though when it first came out, I remember people really hated it because they were like, I need to level up a class thing to use a sword? That's so stupid. Like, yeah, but you're not just doing it to level up the sword.
Yeah,
it's like, to do that, to unlock the sword, it moves the license board in a way that will move that character more towards
this
combat. So that
this role.
Yes, it doesn't make sense in the first couple of chapters at the outset, but in the middle of the game, it really focuses that character based on how you want to use them.
Yeah.
By the end of the game, everyone's license board is totally unlocked and it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, you can use them however, even though certain characters are better at jobs than others.
The summons were worked into it in such a good way in the story, possibly the best way I've ever thought of before. Yeah. Sid is a great villain.
Sid's a bad guy? Oh no.
Yeah, Sid's a bad guy. The villain himself is really good. It was written by the guy that wrote Final Fantasy Tactics, so not only does it have the romance bullshit, it has this overarching
story,
crazy awesome political story, a crazy religious story. All these things just work together really well, and it's just so effing good. And Balthier is probably the coolest character who have ever graced a Final Fantasy game. That man is a badass, bar none. The only character who I've ever felt has out Han Solo'd Han Solo
is Balthier.
Is Balthier in Final Fantasy XII. That man's lines are just great.
Well, it sounds like that I need to put some time into Final Fantasy XII if I can find a copy of it.
It's so good. And when it came out, people really didn't like it because I believe that was the beginning of this internet hate outrage, which Square wasn't really expecting because they didn't really have a direct feedback loop with their audience to really know what they wanted. People were upset that there's really not a romantic relationship as such in 12, although I would argue the core romantic relationship is actually what propels the narrative forward, unlike what happens in 8, where the romantic relationship is ancillary to what propels the narrative forward. The princess's love for her lost prince is what puts the story of 12 in motion and propels the latter game.
Keeps it going.
But at the same time, every character except for Penelo and Vaughn and probably Fran has really good storylines, and Vaughn and Penelo were only put in the game because in the early art where Princess Ash and Bash, the exiled royal guard, were supposed to be the main characters, this dude that looks like a hobo and a princess that looks like not a princess, people were like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I thought
we need other characters.
We were going to have a cool kid character like Titus. So they were like, fine, we'll put Titus in a vest, and here's Vaughn. And everyone went, that's what we wanted. And then the game came out, and they were like, that's not really what we wanted.
No, we don't like that.
So if you were coming to me and you say, Andy, I really want to play a Final Fantasy game, and I want to play one that's going to knock my socks off, keep me interested throughout, have a great battle system, and all this other shit, I'd say 12.
Now, it was one of the first ones. 12 was the one that
had the Gambit system.
Took you away from being able to control all 3 characters, or
Yes.
however many characters in your party, all at once. You then had to basically set up,
you're
going to play
one
this
guy.
role, you're going to
Yep.
play this role, and I'm going to control this one guy.
Yep.
And you could theoretically get the game to grind itself.
Yes. And I did.
And that's fucked up.
Well,
Final Fantasy 12, the game that grinds itself.
by the time you get to the point where you can get the game to grind itself, you're so far into the end game anyway that the only reason you're doing that is to get everyone's license boards filled out.
Yeah.
So
Maybe that's why the license boards were filled out for you.
Yeah,
Because
it
you
probably
just sat
was.
there and let it grind for a day.
yeah. But I also love the side quest stuff of going and getting the different marks. I really love that, and I did a lot of that. So 13, the most derided of all the Final Fantasies. 13 goes in the middle of the pack. In fact, the more I play 13-2, the more I fall in love with its battle system. The more I think the battle system they were trying to do in 12, where you set up your other characters and then your character is a certain role, they kind of took the criticism of that and they said, okay, well, what if we do a similar battle system, but you're able to switch the roles on the fly?
Yeah. And you know, that's kind of a neat idea, except implementation of that is kind of like spot on timing. Because if you don't do it just right, there's a really good chance that you're going to die.
Yeah. The problem with 13 is that its battles are up and done really quickly, and you've either lost or you've won.
Mm-hmm. Especially like the, what do they call them, Illidan's or the summons?
The
that
summons,
you get.
yeah.
Whatever they call them in that game.
The summons are hard because it's just that person versus the summon.
Well, yeah, like with Snow, it's Snow versus Shiva, and all you like the only way to do it is to like block and attack and block and attack and block and attack.
And then it's very specific. The problem with 13's problem isn't its. I'm gonna say something that's radically gonna break the internet. 13's problem isn't its story. It's not its characters. It's not its battle system. It's not even its world. 13's problem is that it handholds you too long.
It does.
If it had not handheld you that long, I think people would have gotten a chance to get used to the battle system, to get everything going, to find these characters, to really fall in love with people, and it wouldn't be as derided as it was.
You know, being able to build your own party, I think, is a lot of what we've gotten used to in Final Fantasy games. You know,
Which is immaterial in 13. That doesn't matter. You don't need to build your own party in 13.
Until the very end, you don't even like, or the back half of that game.
The back half of the game, building your
own party
the point of that is when you're allowed to build your own party. We've always talked about how the internet feeds upon itself when it comes to hate. Everyone saw how linear the first
half of that game,
2/3.
Yeah.
Let's be more than honest. The first 2/3, and they were like, "This sucks. I hate this. It's all hand-holding. Blah blah blah. It's not Final Fantasy. It's not stores. There's not shops. Blah blah blah. It's not towns. All this other stuff." They saw that. What they didn't see was that all that hand-holding was to teach you that once you get in control of everybody, you don't need every person in your party. You just need to control the flow of the battle.
Yeah.
So I say like this, like, if normal Final Fantasy battle is swimming in a lake and paddling and keeping on top of everything and keeping your head above water and doing all this stuff, Final Fantasy 13's is staying on one of those mini tube rafts.
Yeah.
Like you're just riding the waves, trying to figure out and keep your balance and work everything. That's 13's battle system.
Yeah.
You just got, once you get the idea that you're not really controlling the per character, you're controlling the flow of the battle, everything makes a lot more sense, everything's a lot easier, you understand everything a lot more.
Yeah, and you know, I bought the 360 version of that game because I got it for super cheap, and I played 13 to 14 hours of it. I got Saz's summon, and at that point, I was pretty much done with my 360 anyway, so the game disappeared. But I don't know, the amount of hand-holding it did up to that point, and I was probably not even close to getting out of that.
You're not close to getting out of that, but you are to the part where they start not hand-holding you so much.
Yeah. Wow.
But the problem is people didn't let the game go on that long, and that's a very legitimate criticism.
That is a long time. It is a good 20 hours at least.
And I really think if that's not your bag, that's not your bag, and don't play the game. But you're missing out on everything that happens in the back half of that game, Barthandantalus is one of my favorite villains in a Final Fantasy game. In fact, he's the closest to Kefka Palazzo that I think anyone else has ever come as like the anti-Kefka Palazzo. Like everyone always shows, like if Kefka Palazzo is chaotic evil, Barthandantalus is lawful evil. He is bad, and bad as per rule, not bad as per crazy. Lightning's an interesting character. The only dud in the entire franchise,
Snow.
I still think is Snow. I'm going to think that's Snow until the end of the time. The more I play 13.2, the more I think the dud is Snow because
Snow's still a jerk.
Snow's still kind of stupid and dumb and a jerk. But Hope is really a really good character. He has a really satisfying story.
Even though he's a whiny bitch.
Even Vanille and Fang have a really good story that end up, their story makes really good sense by the end of the game and their sacrifice. And I actually felt really bad. And going back and thinking about it over and over again and, reading Wikipedia articles, watching old trailers, playing through part of the game again, the end of that game is foreshadowed in so many different ways. At one point, Zaz is part of the game you got to. Zaz is looking at Vanille after Vanille tells him, I'm responsible for your son being a crystal and basically being dead. And she wants him to kill her. And he goes, you think you're just going to die and everything's going to be rainbows? No. Like, no, that's not true.
It's not going to make it any better anyway.
Yeah. But at the end of the game, Vanille does die and there is a fucking rainbow. And it's like, in terms of storytelling, that's a really good device. And it's really, unlike 8, I don't get to the end of the story and go, how did I get here?
Yeah, 8 had some big issues. And that's why it earned its spot at the bottom of the
So if
list.
someone came to me and said, Andy, I've played every Final Fantasy. Which Final Fantasy should I revisit? 13.
Yeah, and I keep thinking now that I've got a PS4, or will again shortly, I'm going to find a copy of 13 and I'm going to put some time into it. Even though I did not like the first however many hours, or I'll just borrow your copy or whatever.
Yeah, you can borrow my copy. I'm not using it anytime soon. I'm still on 13 too.
Yeah, you're
which
on
is another
2.
thing. A lot of the ancillary titles, specifically 13.2, Final Fantasy 7 Crisis Core.
Tactics.
Well, it's not.
Not like direct
sequels. A lot
sequels.
of the sequel stuff make the game better. Also, the other thing people didn't like about 13, they're throwing all these random words at me like Fal'Cie and La Sith and Seath, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, you didn't read the data logs because there's a reason there's a CIE in all those words. Yeah. Like, they're all thematically connected.
Yeah, they are.
And it's not my fault if you didn't read the data logs, but at the same time, it's not my fault if you didn't like the game. So don't forget to spay and neuter your chocobos. We'll be back next week. You say chocobo, I say chocobo. Whatever. Okay.